Hello, everyone. My name is Garth Allen. I'm the Spiritual Life Director here at Silver Bay YMCA. We're coming to you today from the historic Inn by the fireplace, and we're located in the Adirondack Park along Lake George, and we'd love for you to come see us sometime when the pandemic is over and it's safe and we can all enjoy the beauty of the lake and the Adirondacks together. I want to thank Kyle and Rob from the Alliance of New York YMCAs once again for inviting us to do these videos on self-care for YMCA professionals during this pandemic. My colleague Bruce Tamlin, who's our chaplain, and myself are grateful to be included in these and to be sharing with you. We do hope they're both informative and helpful for you in caring for yourself in these difficult times. So today, my topic is, I want to talk to you about caring for others as a vital aspect of self-care. So that might seem a little odd, right? Caring for others is a vital aspect of self-care. But they actually go hand in hand. When you care for others, you're actually administering care to yourself. So I looked up, there's some research on this actually. Christopher Berglund wrote an article in Psychology Today. It's called The Evolutionary Biology of Altruism. It's a mouthful, but it's an interesting article. And after reviewing several studies on why helping others, caring for others is beneficial to us as individuals, this is his conclusion that he reached. I'm going to read the quote for you. Berglund says this: "We're all in this together. We have not evolved for millennia to be isolated behind digital screens, connected only via text message and social media. Science proves that our genes and our brains have evolved to be compassionate, to cooperate, and to foster community. This is common sense. Hopefully, the science presented in this article reinforces what we already knew intuitively. Being altruistic and kind to one another benefits us all." So before we go on to talk more about how caring for others actually administers self-care to us, I'd like to reiterate some statements that I've made in other presentations in case this is the first time you're seeing one of these videos. So first of all, the YMCA movement is a diverse and inclusive movement. That's one of the things I'm so grateful for to be a part of the YMCA, is that it doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter where you come from, what your faith experience is, you're welcome here in the YMCA. There's a place for everyone, there's room for everyone. No one gets left out and no one gets left behind. So the YMCA, that's who we are as a movement. And secondly, while all that's true, the YMCA is also has its origins in Christianity. The C in YMCA stands for Christian. And thirdly, myself, I am trained as a pastor, and the history of Christianity is my academic background, and so that's the perspective that I come from. And so my session I'll bring those experiences and that training to bear on what I'm saying today. So I embrace the historic Christian faith, and so I'll be using the Bible today. And whether you adhere to the Christian faith or you believe the Bible has been an influential book throughout our history. And so hopefully you can find something in there that resonates with you, whether or not you buy into the whole Christian faith. So let's return to our topic. Caring for others is a vital aspect of our own self-care. I'd like for us to look at a story that Jesus told in Luke chapter 10. It's familiar to maybe many of us, even if you're not in the Christian faith. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. And that's even come into our own language. You may hear about Good Samaritan laws and things like that. So this phrase may be familiar even if you're not familiar with the story. But as I read the story, I'd like you to try to, if you can, listen to it for the first time. Imagine you're in the story. Put yourself in the shoes of one of the characters in the story and try to think which of the characters that you hear about you relate to, or which of the ones you identify with. So I'm going to read this story from Luke chapter 10, and then I'll make some comments about it. "And behold, a lawyer stood up to put Jesus to the test, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" The lawyer answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus said to him, "You have correctly answered. Do this, and you will live." But the lawyer, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw the injured man, he passed by on the other side of the road. Likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw the injured man, he passed by on the other side of the road. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where the injured man was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. He went to the injured man and bound up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. Then he set the injured man on his own animal and brought the man to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of this man, and whatever more you may spend, I will repay you when I come back." Jesus said, "Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" The lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." Jesus said to the lawyer, "You go and do likewise." So we actually have 2 stories going on here. The first story is this encounter between Jesus and the lawyer. And then the second story is the actual story that Jesus tells about this man who fell among robbers and was injured. So let's go through these characters one by one, sort of a who's who in the story. First, the lawyer. Now, this lawyer was in some ways similar to lawyers of today, if we're painting a caricature of them, because he asked a lot of questions that he already knew the answer to, and he was more interested in feeling good about himself than he was actually knowing the truth. But however, this lawyer wasn't like lawyers today in the fact that he was an expert in the Jewish law. This kind of lawyer was known for meticulously keeping all the commandments of the law, for putting down others who did not do that. He was primarily interested in what are the boundaries, what are the limits of the law. He sought to do exactly what the law required, nothing more and nothing less. Many of us know people like this. They are rule followers, maybe, and scorekeepers. They want to follow the rules simply because they feel good for having done the right things. And they keep score so they can feel superior to other people. Like, I've done these commands and maybe you haven't, so I'm better than you. Now, maybe some of you identify with this man. And there have been times in my life when I have felt like I have to keep all the rules meticulously and feel better about myself for doing that. So that's one person you might identify with. The second is this injured man. And I'd like to give you a little bit of historical background just to help understand the story a little bit better. This trip from Jerusalem to Jericho was a 17-mile journey, and there was this descent. Jerusalem sits up on a hill, and so it was a 3,000-foot descent down this hill. And there was one particularly hazardous section during Jesus' lifetime called the Way of Blood. And that was because all the murderers and robbers hung out in this one section of the road, and if you happened to be going there by yourself, you could fall into trouble. Now, we don't really know anything about this man, why he was traveling that way, or what was going on. All we know is that he was severely beaten, robbed, and left nearly dead. Now, many of us know people like this. Perhaps some of us actually feel like this injured man. During this COVID-19 crisis, we feel life has beaten us up. We feel like we're suffering simply because we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, like this man. And so maybe you identify with the injured man who was beaten up. Now, the second 2 characters are the priest and the Levite. And again, we need some historical background here. The priest was a Jewish priest, and he led worship at the temple in Jerusalem. He was one of the men who would prepare the sacrifices and would present offerings and incense and other things to God. The priest stood between God and his people as a mediator in worship. Now, this office of a priest in Jewish tradition was very important. It was a prestigious position. And so the priest had to be well schooled in God's law. And though he knew the law in great detail, he neglected to show kindness and mercy to this injured man. For whatever reason, he saw him and went to the other side of the street and avoided all contact with him. Now, the Levite's job was to assist and to serve the priests in the care and maintenance of God's temple in Jerusalem. Now, the Levite wasn't at the same level as the priest, but he was still critical to the importance of the inner workings of the temple, and he was also well schooled in the law. And though he knew it well, he again neglected to show kindness and mercy to this injured man and actually moved away from him. Now, we know people like this as well, don't we? They say they care for people, and they talk a really good game, yet their actions and attitudes don't match up with what they say, what their words are. The problem isn't that they don't know what they should be doing. They know what they should do, and they fail to do it. And now maybe you identify with either of these men. Now, if I'm being completely honest, sometimes I do too. There are times when I know I should engage and offer care, and I pull back, probably more often than I'd like to admit. So lastly, we have the Samaritan. Now, if you're only familiar with Samaritan from our culture, we always hear the Good Samaritan. So we may think of Samaritan, obviously a great person. But in Jesus' day, the Samaritans were a group of people. They were among the most hated enemies of the Jews. They were outcasts for a variety of reasons related to the way that they worshiped and their background. And they were hated by religious authorities, particularly like the lawyer we heard about in the beginning of this story. So it's very interesting that Jesus chooses someone who's an outcast and an enemy of the people to be the hero of the story. But let's take a closer look at how this man actually cared, how the Samaritan cared for the injured man. There are three things. First, actually there's four things, but we'll do the first three and we'll talk about the fourth as well. First, the Samaritan saw the injured man. He didn't merely look at him. He actually saw him. He looked at him and tried to put himself in his place. He recognized that the injured man was not much different from him. He was a fellow traveler who was in need of desperate help. The priest and the Levite, they might have looked at the injured man, but they didn't really see him because they looked away so quickly they were concerned with other things. Secondly, the Samaritan felt something for the injured man. The scripture says they felt compassion for him. He was moved by the injured man's predicament. The Samaritan was able to put himself in the injured man's situation and actually feel empathy for him. How different from the priest and the Levite who felt only fear or disdain or worried about where they were going. They didn't have time to help this poor man. Thirdly, the Samaritan drew near to the injured man. He drew near to him. Verse 34 says the Samaritan went to him. The Samaritan came close to the injured man while the priest and Levite crossed the street to actually distance themselves from the man. Fourthly, the Samaritan offered what I'm going to call costly care or generous care to the injured man. And in truth, when we offer care for someone, it always is costly to us. It always requires our generosity to offer care to someone. Think about the care that he offered. The Samaritan bandaged the injured man's wounds. Now, the Samaritan obviously didn't have probably a first aid kit or Band-Aids, so he likely had to tear up some of his own clothing or some of his own blankets or something to make bandages for the man. That's costly. The Samaritan used both oil and wine, which were precious commodities in that day, to treat the man's wounds. Then it says the Samaritan lifted the injured man on his animal. So this required both physical effort and energy to lift an injured man onto the donkey, say. And then the Samaritan could no longer ride, he had to walk. So it cost him physically. And then it says the Samaritan brought the injured man to an inn and cared for him. So this meant he spent both time in getting the man there and money for him to stay there. You might have heard a strange word in the Bible reading, a denarii or denarius, which was the Roman equivalent of a day's wage. So if we think about it, the Samaritan spent money on an inn. So for us, maybe a good night at a hotel, at a decent hotel, costs $100 or $150, maybe more. And then we think about a denarius, a day's wage. In New York State, for an 8-hour day, you can make almost $100. So this Samaritan, if we were to calculate what he spent in today's money, he probably spent $300 or more of his own cash to take care of this man and to pay for his help. So this care was costly that the Samaritan offered the injured man. It was generous. He gave of his personal belongings, right? His own clothing, his own oil and wine. He gave of his own money, and he expended physical energy and time. He was most concerned that it would give the man full healing. He wasn't really concerned about what it would cost himself. So the Samaritan actually loved his neighbor. And the lawyer's question at the beginning of the story, who is my neighbor? Jesus defines it as anyone in need. Not just the person that lives next door or the person across the street. Our neighbor is anyone who is in need. And the Samaritan says that anyone who is in need deserves our mercy, our compassion, and our empathy. So I hope each of you is beginning to see how this story, the story of the Good Samaritan, can connect with your own story. Each of us, upon hearing this message, has some choices to make. We can choose to be like the lawyer or the priest or the Levite, and when we see need, we can turn away and look away from it and not get involved, not get our hands dirty. We know at this time in New York State, there's great need because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And are we going to just look away from it, or are we going to engage in ways that maybe we won't literally get our hands dirty, but figuratively we need to get engaged in a way that's costly to us? We can choose to be like the Samaritan, right? And that's what I'm advocating. We can actually let ourselves see the need. And that's a challenge, because when we actually see the need, it can be painful. We know that to see the need and to feel the pain means that we need to get involved. So we could do that, we can see the need, and then we need to begin to allow ourselves to feel compassion, to feel mercy, to engage those feelings and let them lead us to do the other two things, to draw near. Now in this time, we're not supposed to draw physically near, but there are ways that we can connect with other people that is meaningful and that offers care to them. It may be by picking up the phone and calling someone who you haven't seen, maybe someone who's not engaged in a community like you are. It may mean paying for someone else's groceries or things like that. So there are ways to be engaged without being near physically. And lastly, be generous. Caring for others is costly, but in the end, there is a benefit from sharing and being generous that benefits ourselves by the feelings that we get of being good and kind and loving to our neighbors. Now, and for those of you that may feel like this injured man, you may feel beat up, you may feel in pain, at a loss, maybe because you've lost someone because of the virus, or maybe because you're isolated and not feeling that human connection that you need. My plea to you is don't suffer in silence. Don't just try to carry that all on your own. There are people who care, so reach out to people in your family. If you don't feel like you have someone close in your family, reach out to someone in the Y community. Even reach out to myself or Bruce here at Silver Bay. You can find our emails on our website. You can call us, and we would love to talk to you. There is no need for people to suffer in silence during this pandemic. There's help available. There's hope for the future. At this time, it's okay to allow others to care for you, like this injured man. He needed care. He couldn't make it on his own. And all of us have times like that where we need to allow others to care for us. So thank you for your attention today to this video. I do hope that each of you is able to take something helpful from it, that your journey during this strange and difficult time is improved because you've learned something here today. On behalf of Silver Bay YMCA and the New York Alliance of YMCAs, we all wish you, your families, and your communities safety and health as we work together to get through the COVID-19 pandemic. Please take care of yourselves. Embrace this generous spirit of caring. God bless you all. Thank you.